the inside nuts.
Yes.
You.
Yeah. Talk about my cab driver on the way here. He was quite the character.
Help you, Joe.
We will be starting soon. The GKCC, the first Wisdom Wednesday will be starting soon. Stand by.
Is that our cue to disappear? Okay. We'll see you
Let us
after.
know.
See you later.
Don't keep us locked in our room forever.
Have fun, break a leg.
Hi, my name is Jeff. I'm the Marketing and Events Coordinator at the Greater Kingston Chamber of Commerce. The GKCC is excited to launch Wisdom Wednesday, a brand new webinar series designed to educate, engage, and empower our business community. This live monthly series brings together the expertise of our chamber members, offering valuable insights on the issues, trends, and challenges shaping our local economy. Much like a lunch and learn, Wisdom Wednesday takes place 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., making it easy to tune in during your break. Whether you're looking for a strategic business advice, industry trends, or expert guidance, this series delivers actionable knowledge straight from local leaders who know what it takes to succeed. You can watch Wisdom Wednesday on our website, YouTube channel, and podcast platforms so you never miss a session. This initiative aligns with the Chamber's commitment to influence, support, and connect our members, because when we share knowledge, we all grow together. For our first Wisdom Wednesday, the Greater Kingston Chamber of Commerce is excited to welcome Kylie Jensen, Employer Recruitment Lead at Keys Job Center, as our presenter. Kylie will be leading a valuable discussion on preparing for the multi-generational workforce. With 5 generations now working side by side, understanding how to attract, retain, and engage talent across different age groups is more important than ever. Kylie brings deep expertise in employer recruitment and workforce development, helping businesses like yours build strong, inclusive teams. As a leader at Keys, the largest provider of newcomer services in our region, Kylie supports job seekers of all ages and abilities, entrepreneurs chasing their business goals, and employers looking for staffing, training, and retention solutions. Every day, Keys helps people unlock their potential, whether it's a student landing their first job, a newcomer mastering English, or an experienced professional re-entering the workforce. Without further delay, please welcome Ms. Kylie Jensen. Ms. Jensen.
Thank you, Jeff, for that warm introduction. As Jeff mentioned, I work for Keys Employment and Newcomer Services. My name's Kylie, as he said, and I am a job developer. So lots of experience working with both job seekers and employers across the full spectrum of generations. And today we're just going to have a lighthearted discussion on the multi-generational workplace. It right now is primarily made up of 4 generations, but as we're going to talk about today, that 5th generation of Alpha is right on our heels, and we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the impact that that's going to have as well.
Fantastic. fantastic.
Yeah, I welcome questions throughout the presentation, so if anybody has any, just put them in the chat. Someone is monitoring that, and we can kind of just have those discussions as we go as well.
Sounds great.
Okay, so just an overview of the multi-generations. We are primarily talking about boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. So boomers are 1946 to 1964, and Gen Z would be 1965 to 1980, with millennials coming in from 1981 to 1996, and Gen Z born primarily between 1997 and 2012, meaning that the alphas are 2012 until actually the 2024 this year. Generation Beta was born just not long ago. You were just starting to be born a month ago. So right now it's primarily those four, and as many of us who work in the workforce know, there's all sorts of different challenges and also opportunities and experiences that come from that. I'm going to go a little bit through kind of each generation and what some of the values are of each one, talk a little bit about how that changes communication style, and talk a little bit about sort of what we can do in our workplaces to make the most of the breadth of experience and the breadth of learning styles that come with that. So starting with, and I should preface by saying, these are broad generalizations, like anything else, and it helps us kind of understand the scope and how we're framing things. But like any other, EDII practices, and understanding inclusivity and diversity is it's a big topic, and everybody's individual. And as I was prepping for this workshop, my colleagues reminded me that a lot of us are sort of maybe one generation by birth, but sort of a line, with a different generation. So a lot of, I'm X, but maybe identify a little bit more as a millennial, or vice versa. Of course, Alpha are teenagers right now, so they don't align with any of us, but we'll chat a little bit about what they're going to bring to the workforce in the coming years as well. So starting with boomers, stability and loyalty are very significant values for this particular group, in terms of work ethic, commitment, perseverance, and dedication, right? I mean, many of us have, grown up, those of us that are in that generation, or those of you who are in that generation, not giving away which generation I'm in, but those of you that are in that generation can probably relate to that. And those of us that aren't, probably have heard it from parents, grandparents, just pull up your bootstraps, go to work. You don't have to like it, but it's your job, kind of thing, right? So that commitment to loyalty. In terms of company loyalty, they certainly value long-term employment and commitment. Stability is a goal early on. We hear a lot about, the retirement date, and of course, economic times are changing that a little bit, which kind of is what's leading us to this soon-to-be 5 generational workplace. Communication is usually that face-to-face interaction. Most of their time in the workforce would have been spent in person, and only in recent years would that have changed. Gen X is very much, we tend to think of as being independent, really valuing independence and also balance. Coming off of that stability of the generation ahead of them, but certainly also self-reliant, resourceful. They value personal time and flexibility in a different way than the generation ahead of them, but also maybe not in the same way as the millennials. Communication of Generation X tends to be very direct, very efficient communication style, in both with technology and sort of, without. I work in an office with multi-generations. We share an office. There's 3 of us, and there is quite an age gap between the 3 of us. And my one colleague, we're all very similar roles. We're all job developers. We all work with employers as well as clients. And so one of my colleagues certainly, he goes in person. That's what he does. His first instinct is to go. Sometimes he doesn't even have an appointment. We'll just show up. It's all about that face-to-face communication, all about making those relationships, and having those conversations in real time. And then I'm kind of in the middle, and I will do a lot of that, but with an appointment first. So I'll send an email, or I'll pick up the phone first, and then kind of do that follow-up of that face-to-face. And then whereas my younger colleague, gets online, kind of gets all the information gathering, as much information as they can, sort of very early on, kind of collects that all, has that all going into a meeting, and then we'll kind of have that follow-up piece. So it really does sort of impact all of the things that we do within our day. The millennials tend to really focus purpose. They seek meaningful work. The millennial generation has always sort of wanted to have a social impact. So really looking at that impact that their work has, and values continuous learning and development, and also really has a desire for flexible work environments. Gen Z, they're digital natives. Most of their growing up, most of their education, certainly any of their work experiences would have been within the digital age. They're very comfortable generally with technology, and that includes things like being able to go and get that information. So it really sort of, they have a lot of different kinds of knowledge. It might not be learned experience in the same way that we were thinking those in the boomer generation would have, but it's just a different kind of information gathering. They tend to be very innovative and entrepreneurial, and very eager to create their own space and find their own opportunities within a culture that they're part of. And they tend to prefer digital communication, at least initially. What I really find interesting working with different organizations across multi-generational barriers is that we're talking about communication, and Generation Z definitely prefers they'll text you, and it's one word text and things like that. But actually in the workplace, where a lot of statistics have demonstrated that they actually prefer face-to-face contact. So it's actually that generation that wants to go in the office and wants to have those in-person sort of connections, but may still be connecting digitally in other ways. And that's quite interesting. And then, of course, we have the alphas coming up. So those are our teenagers right now. At Keys, we don't have many of the alphas, working in the traditional workplace yet. They're still quite young, with 2012 being the first birth year of that group. But they're starting to take courses. They're starting to enter our training programs. They're babysitting. They're becoming lifeguards. We see them reffing our kids' sports. So we're really starting to see sort of what that generation looks like, and kind of the types of values that they're going to bring to the workplace as well. So tech fully integrated in their lives. So right from the time that they were babies, and it's part of their everyday reality. Adaptability, they are adaptable and open to change, and can adapt to change with the changing economy, and of course post-COVID, and a lot of the things that we've experienced in the last few years. However, in a very structured sort of framework. And they also tend to be, they're future leaders, and they're looking at kind of that innovation piece and sort of what, they're going to be bringing to the table in the next couple of years. boomers. So that's kind of just an overview of the different generations. And I have a lot of opportunity to work sort of across the full spectrum. Of course, at Keys, most of our workplaces have representation from most of these generations. Keys itself is a very diverse in kind of the full breadth of diversity at Keys, including multi-generation and even within the same position, as I mentioned, with my office mates. But also in my personal life, I'm a coach of youth basketball, so I work a lot with that generation alpha, and I'm always trying to find creative ways to communicate with them and sort of interact. And there's lots of let's go chase the ball, get the ball. It's a very different interaction in terms of that structured environment of what is my role, what am I doing, what do I need to do next, sort of step by step, right? Whereas when I was taught and from the generation of boomers, when we were being coached, it was you teach the first person the steps, they do the steps, and then the second person follows that person, and then the third person follows that person, and you kind of just jump in. Whereas I was noticing with the alphas generation that they were expecting sort of a tailored training individually at each step of the way, right? So it wasn't, follow the person ahead of you, but was rather, take direction from the coach kind of at each specific step. So again, just very different ways of learning, very different ways of sort of, taking in that information. There haven't been any questions on technology yet, but I was expecting today to get some questions about sort of how technology impacts a lot of these relationships. Did we actually get one? Oh, we did. Okay.
So I look at technology and say computer literacy almost like reading.
Okay, yeah.
In order to enter the workforce, you have to be able to read, right?
Absolutely.
So you have to have at least some knowledge of computer literacy, I would guess, right? So what role does technology play in bridging generational gaps, and how can businesses implement digital tools without alienating certain age groups?
So that's a great question and great talking points. I think that technology is, so for the alphas and Generation Z, technology is just a part of their everyday lives, right? They can't really escape it, right? It's in their schools, it's how they communicate with each other. They got through some very difficult years with technology sort of lifting them up. And then, of course, beyond the having to help our office mates with their phones, every time we get a new upgrade, and the usual grumbling of, it's just a click, you could just do that, and the fun back and forth antics that we have across generations with technology. I think everybody finds their own way to use it, right? So, to give you a couple examples, yesterday I was struggling with the concept of what today was going to look like, and not so much with the material, but more with the actual integration piece, because and how I was going to interact with my audience. I definitely come from a background of I stand in front of a room and we engage and we talk, and I used to facilitate a lot of programs at the university and how that kind of looks like. And my office mate, who's quite a bit younger than me, said, "Oh, well, it's still very interactive," and was giving me all the sort of the rundown on the tools that we would be able to use in terms of the audience asking questions. And I thought about it for a moment and thought, yes, for him, it was a no-brainer. It was just as connected and just as inclusive as my experience, in front of the classroom. And then, of course, I got home and I was still continuing to sort of think it through in my head, and my son, who's very much in the alpha generation, was like, "Mom, you're just overthinking it. ChatGPT could solve all your problems." So, technology is, we can't escape it, but we just have to find ways to sort of use it and to help each other sort of, connect with it. Another example is actually on my way here today. I was in the cab, and for those of you who may have taken the cab ride with Cameron, probably, shout out to him, one of the best cab drivers in Kingston. But he plays this thing called the name game. And, when you get in, he asks you your name and asks you if you know the meaning of your name. And of course, I didn't really. I knew that, why my parents chose my name, but not necessarily sort of the meaning of it. And we started talking about, so he says, well, let's figure that out together. Let's figure out the meaning of your name. And I said, sure, do you want me to Google it? He's like, no. So of course, it was very obvious. He was a bit older than me, likely in a very, a different generation. And my initial thing was thinking, oh, he, doesn't want to rely on Google, wants to kind of troubleshoot this together. And then he says, hey, Google, tell me about the name Kylie. And Google comes on in the car and starts to sort of give a background of my name. And we have a chat about it. And I realized it wasn't, when I had said, do you want me to Google it? It wasn't the Googling that was the disconnect between him and I. It was the way I was Googling. So he wasn't encouraging me to get out my phone and look at it and have that sort of insular moment of connecting on the phone. He was thinking, we want to get to know each other. And in order to get to know each other and in order to have meaningful conversation, we need to talk kind of out loud, but we can still use Google to facilitate that. So I thought that was a really perfect example of, how we can use technology and how we can to connect us and to bring out sort of the best communication styles of each generation.
Amazing.
Yeah, okay, so thank you for that question, and keep them coming, I like questions. So it's a little bit about kind of, the technological piece, but I think, there's a lot of different elements to sort of the workplace piece. One of the other big pieces that we get a lot of questions about from employers is around day-to-day engagement. And around the conversations of how do we connect? How do we ensure that everybody's sort of feeling as integrated in the workplace? And what are those types of tools that we can use to do that? And that's an interesting one because with the different generations, we talked about, the boomer generation being very show up and get there on time and put your time in, and, at the end, you'll see your reward sort of thing, right? And generation, and a lot of our employers are very much still boomers or Generation X. And then we see Generation Z come in and say, oh, what are you going to do for me? What are my perks? What's that going to look like? What are my options for professional development? And what does the work-life balance look like? And you sort of sometimes still get that work-life balance. Well, that's something you have to figure out. And the Generation Z is like, nope, we're gonna kind of figure that out together. So it's something that is ever evolving, and I think a lot of that comes from mentorship. So, it's easy to think, terminology can sometimes trip us up, right? So sometimes we think, it has to be traditional sort of education. So when they're asking for professional development or training, the older generations certainly think of that as very utility based. You need to have this skill, let's put you in a course and teach you that skill. Where, the younger generations are coming in saying, no, there's all kinds of different ways that I can learn and grow, and it doesn't have to be quite so utility based. It doesn't have to be direct. It doesn't have to have that application. And so sometimes I think we can just slow it down and say, oh, well, we've got this expertise of this older generation, and we have this younger generation that wants to learn. That's your training program, right? That mentorship piece and the things that we can learn from each other. You have those as employers and business people. You have that built in already. So really looking at some of these generational challenges and the things that happen here in terms of the communication and saying, we're solving our own problems. And that can be, kind of like we did yesterday with me sort of overthinking it, which I don't think is a generational thing so much as a personality trait. But as I'm overthinking it, my colleagues just kind of breaking it down for me and saying, oh no, this is how we can use these tools. So that's kind of another piece. It looks like maybe we have another question.
Well, to that effect, we were talking about the different generations and their expectations in the workforce. To that point, I would ask, what are some of the common misconceptions or stereotypes about different generations in the workplace, and how can we break them?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Yeah, so, obviously, so you sort of still get, I think if you think about, sometimes it's easier sometimes to think about this even within our own families, and then translating them into the workplaces in terms of that grumbling around, the kids these days have it so much easier. I remember my dad, talking to us about walking to school and going up the hill and trucking, all this gear. And, then when we went and looked at his hometown, it was basically just a little bump on the road, right? Like those kinds of stories, I think, are natural, and it's part of sharing insight and history. But certainly that can also lead to stereotypes, right? So certainly the younger generation thinking like, the economy was so much better when the boomers and even Generation X went in, and of course it was easier for you because life wasn't as expensive, and you got into a unionized environment right away, and kind of looking at that path as being simpler. And that certainly is a generalization and can be a stereotype and can really limit our ability to be able to learn from that generation. And there were challenges, and there is a lot of value in that loyalty and that stability, and sort of vice versa, the misconceptions or the stereotypes around what that work-life balance looks like, and thinking, okay, work-life balance means you don't actually want to come to work, and you just want to have your social time and take all these breaks and be on your phone and kind of things like that. And even that piece, like with the phones, I don't use my phone as much as my son does, or as much as even my colleague in that generation would potentially, but yet they're not necessarily using their phones just for social time, right? They're not using their phones just to look at pictures or memes, but they're using their phones as tools, and they're using their phones to connect and to get kind of that information that they seek. And so really just opening up and kind of having those conversations and being able to sort of learn from those experiences, I think definitely is the way forward. Certainly at Keys, we know that, again, in the future weeks, somebody from Keys is going to be talking about EDII and all the other different kinds of diversity and inclusivity and all the important pieces of sharing and learning and communicating. But ageism really still is a pretty significant factor in many, many workplaces. And when we talk about ageism, we're certainly talking about it from both sides, right? We have a number of job seekers that come in, that are in the boomer generation and maybe had great careers, but those careers are changing because of the advent of technology, or maybe they at one time were able to retire, and then because of financial burden can no longer, and then we have younger generations kind of coming in and feeling like the opportunities just aren't there because the older generations are still in those jobs. And so we certainly see that idea of ageism and the idea of feeling that your age is preventing you from getting where you want to be happening across the spectrum. It's not just youth or just an older generation. So it's an ongoing thing for sure. Yeah.
I got another one for you.
Yeah.
But and along the lines of, you were hinting at the diversity, equity, and inclusion, how does generational diversity fit into the broader diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? And what are some of the best practices for fostering inclusivity across age groups?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, one of it is, I went through kind of some of those value statements of each generation, but I think the first thing is really remembering that they are generalizations and really being careful not to pigeonhole, not to sort of take it as rule, and really to continue just seeking new opportunity to sort of learn. I think also talking about it, right? And addressing it right from the very beginning, and sort of maybe having a good laugh about it every now and then, because sometimes it can be, quite comical. And so for example, my husband was on a call with a group of colleagues, and one of his colleagues was referring to Riz, and there had been a lot of turnover on his team, and so he was like, "Who's Riz? Why don't I know who this Riz person is?" Thinking that he missed a memo, or he isn't great with names to begin with, so I thought maybe he just it was a bit of a gaffe there on his part. And another person on the call said, "No, she's not talking about a person. Riz means," and then my son heard us talking and popped in and said, "Charisma, obviously. Obviously that's what Riz means," right? So it was another moment of, oh, actually we're not talking about a person, this is a terminology. Of course, the older generations not understanding lingo isn't a new thing, right? Like the language we use always changes, but I think one part of it that is new is that we're not necessarily accustomed to having that in the workplace. So it wasn't just, that little moment wasn't just about the language, it was about the context and about when we're using it and how we're using it. And so I think, being able to kind of laugh at that situation, but then take that next step and be like, okay, well, so you're thinking charisma, why is that significant in this moment? And having that follow-up conversation of kind of breaking down, that miscommunication piece. Yeah.
Along those languages, I got another question, Lauren, and you may or may not be able to answer this, but with the varying 5 generations in the workforce, right, having to be very aware of what you say, now more than ever, in the job environment. Does Keys offer anything to their members to help them with, when you enter the job force and you enter the workforce, these are the sorts of things, key phrases or things to avoid, things to use. Do you give them any guidance?
Yeah, we do, in a number of different ways. So Keys is a very dynamic place, and we have a number of different programs. And so depending on how either an employer or a client is accessing services, that might happen through one-on-one support. So for example, the team that I'm part of, we actually do on-the-job coaching. So we may actually go and sort of coach somebody through their first couple days, and really get an idea of what that work environment looks like, and have conversation ad hoc. But then it also happens in more traditional training formats. So especially with youth, they might come in as a group and have a youth discussion. The newcomer services is very involved in the communities that they work with, and having those conversations ongoing, just in terms of entering the workforce, but also they work with families with youth who would be going to school, and they work with people as they're transitioning into Kingston, and having those conversations as well. And then of course we also can work with employers and help employers set up some programs and some training around sort of language and sort of professional expectations. So I hope that answers your question.
Bingo.
Yeah, okay, great. So I don't know, maybe I need a time check here as well from the team behind the screens. We're good to go? Okay. Keep the questions coming. I really like those pieces. And I think the thing is that, there's lots of, we all kind of come in with sort of our own expectations and our own sort of context, and look at things in our own ways, and talking about things in terms of generations can sometimes really help us understand, oh yeah, that's why I do that thing, or that's why I reacted that way. I do really value my lunch break, or I do really value the opportunity to have feedback. That's, you know, like feedback, for example, most of you are business owners, is a really interesting one. We often talk about it in terms of how people want feedback. So boomers, for example, tend to be accustomed to a very formal, but not necessarily regular feedback. So having performance reviews, documenting things, having metrics that they need to achieve, and that's good. I meet them, I know what my expectations are, I can kind of stick to that plan. Whereas then we have, you know, other generations where it's like, no, I kind of want to have that conversation. I want it to be ongoing. It's connected to, you know, to that training piece of I want to know how to improve and what I can do to sort of grow and have that be ongoing. And then generation Z is saying, oh yeah, like kind of regular touch points, you know, needs a lot of sort of encouragement or even just sort of likes that piece, that presence, but it can be very quick and it can be very hyper-focused, similar to the sort of text piece. And then my example of coaching the alphas, they same sort of thing, like really having that ongoing. And I think a lot of that comes from just that immediacy of technology. So that immediacy of I need an answer, I have an answer, you know, I can get the answer sort of, you know, very, very quickly. So it's kind of ever evolving. We're still learning a lot about what that's going to look like. And, you know, I didn't mention too much, but there's even still that generation above the boomers even that are still influencing our culture. I didn't necessarily focus on them too much in this webinar because for the most part they've exited the workplace, but they're still contributing very heavily. They're still in a lot of businesses, have partial ownership. There's still that influence of their generation. They are still very much customers for a lot of our viewers working in businesses in Kingston. That sort of economic wealth often still lies in that generation. And so there's still that input as well, right? So we're getting it from so many different directions that I think just continuing to have those conversations is the way to go. So it looks like maybe we have time for a few more questions. No? We're good?
We're good.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This was the first one, so I appreciate everybody bearing with me, and I look forward to what the Chamber membership will actually bring forward for future conversations as well.